Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I have a few questions. Is Trump guilty of the charges contained in the articles of impeachment? I'm talking about the 2021 articles of impeachment. Did he actually incite an insurrection? And is there mens rea in this case, a guilty mind? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, let's take a look at what is in the articles of impeachment. What is Trump actually accused of? Here is a summary of that document. The articles accuse Trump of inciting an insurrection. There was a joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. Not far away, Trump addressed a crowd of his supporters. He said, "We won this election, and we won it by a landslide." Of course, this statement was not true. The articles allege that he willfully made statements that encouraged imminent lawless action at the Capitol. The actions of the mob were foreseeable and caused damage. Trump's behavior was consistent with his prior efforts to prevent the certification of the 2020 presidential election. The articles specifically mentioned a phone call that Trump made on January 2, 2021, to the Georgia Secretary of State, in which Trump encouraged him to find enough votes, and Trump appeared to threaten the Secretary of State if he failed to find those votes. Trump's behavior threatened the security of the United States and jeopardized a peaceful transition of power. He will remain a threat, therefore he must be removed from office and never serve in office again. So, again, that's the summary of the articles of impeachment. Now I want to provide a quick summary of the impeachment process. I covered this in more detail in a prior video. Federal or state officials can be impeached. The president, of course, is a federal official. It only takes a simple majority in the House to impeach an official. This is what happened for Donald Trump on January 13, 2021. This was actually the second time he was impeached. The first time was in December of 2019. This stage can be thought of as an indictment, like if a citizen was indicted for committing burglary or indicted for stealing a car. That's different than being convicted. The person still has a trial coming up. Similarly, Donald Trump will have a trial. It has a structure similar to a criminal trial, except in the case of the impeachment of a president, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the judge, the House is the prosecutor, and the Senate is the jury. A jury in a criminal case has to vote unanimously, so guilty or not guilty, but the vote in the Senate only needs to be a 2/3 majority. One of the major differences between impeachment and a criminal proceeding is that if someone is impeached, only two things can happen to them. They are removed from office, and with a subsequent vote, they can be disqualified from ever holding an office in the future. An official can be impeached even if they did not engage in criminal conduct. The phrase treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors can be interpreted as misconduct that would include both criminal and non-criminal behavior. If Donald Trump is convicted, that's all that's going to happen to him. He will not be put in jail or be assigned to a chain gang or anything like that. Although if he were to be, he would probably say it would be the best chain gang ever. Another difference is the standard of proof. With impeachment, there really isn't one. In a criminal trial, the charges must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil trial, it's a preponderance of evidence. With the impeachment process, it's really whatever the senators feel like. Realistically, the standard is probably somewhere between reasonable doubt and a preponderance of evidence. A preponderance of evidence is usually considered 51% sure. So if somebody looks at a case and says, I'm 51% sure this person did it, that would meet that standard of proof. Reasonable doubt doesn't have a number associated with it, but research indicates it usually works out to be about 90%. So I will assume the standard of proof in impeachment is about 70%. Seems like a good balance. This brings us to the idea of mens rea. That is a guilty mind or a criminal state of mind. Another way to think of it is intent. Usually this would be required for a conviction. Trump could have incited an insurrection unintentionally and still be convicted, but I want to answer the questions that arise here. Did Trump have mens rea? Was the riot foreseeable? Was he actually guilty? Did he, in fact, incite an insurrection? Going back to the articles of impeachment I talked about before, we can boil them down to 3 accusations that arguably add up to inciting an insurrection. Chronologically, we have saying something that wasn't true, that phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State, and encouraging lawless action during his speech in Washington, D.C. I will analyze each of these. I'm going to spend the most time on that last one. So the first one, Trump said the election was stolen. The evidence doesn't support this claim. Therefore, I think one could at least be 70% sure that he's guilty on that item. The phone call, he did appear to be asking the Georgia Secretary of State to do something illegal, and it also appears as though Trump threatened him. Again, based on that 70% standard of proof, he appears to be guilty. Now on to the third item, and of course this is the most important to proving incitement of an insurrection, encouraging lawless action. Even though the articles reference his speech in Washington, D.C., one could argue that all of his speech could be taken into account at his trial. This one really gets into a free speech issue. So on one side, insurrection, on the other side, free speech. I will focus specifically on what he said during his January 6, 2021 speech. I'm just picking out a few things that were important, and I am paraphrasing some of this. The speech was quite long. Trump said, "I am honest." So as soon as I read that, I had to stop right there. I'm not sure any politician can say that with a straight face, not just Trump. Trump went on to say, "We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved." I think this is important because it creates an urgency to respond to a false crime. Here's the analogy I would use in the situation. Say that you're walking down the street, minding your own business, and you're lawfully concealing a firearm. You happen upon 3 men who are out in the street. The first man is punching the second man. The second man's laying on the street. So the first man's punching him, and the third man says to you, "You need to shoot the first man. He's going to kill that second man." Let's just say that the third man somehow knows that you have a gun. He shouldn't know if it was properly concealed. Either way, do you draw your weapon? What if later on you find out that the second man and the third man were actually the aggressors, and the first man was defending himself? Trump is saying there's a crime and demanding the urgency of stopping a crime in progress when there was no crime at all. The next quote is also in the articles of impeachment, as I mentioned. "We won this election, and we won it by a landslide." Again, the statement's not true. He suggested that there were many weak Republicans. He said, "We are going to have to fight harder." This statement advocates for more extreme action. Trump goes on to say, "We are going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them." So this creates kind of an odd situation. So he's encouraging them to go into the Capitol and cheer for some people, and then I guess give a half-hearted cheer to others. I don't know what that's about. This one is a bit more challenging. It is different from saying something like, "We're going there to threaten, intimidate, and attack some of them." But it may suggest that the weak Republicans should be targeted in some way. Trump continues by saying, "You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. You have to be strong." So the question becomes, how is the crowd supposed to show strength? What does that look like in practice? Are they supposed to flex their muscles like a young Arnold Schwarzenegger? It's not really clear here. Moving on, Trump says, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." This one seems to run counter to the idea of inciting an insurrection. He specifically promotes peaceful behavior with these words. Then he proceeds to go on about the false claim that the election was stolen. He goes through examples from many different states, just more misinformation. Trump says that the radical left knows exactly what they're doing. They're ruthless, and it's time somebody did something about it. Again, we don't see any explanation of what the word something means there. Here's where we get to another particularly troubling section. He tells the crowd that when they hear the phrase, while there is no evidence to prove any wrongdoing, so that particular phrase, while there is no evidence to prove any wrongdoing, he said that is fraudulent, a criminal enterprise. So again, we see this sense of urgency. He said that he could go on for another hour reading this stuff. I was thinking people could read Little Red Riding Hood for hours. That doesn't make it true. Talking about what Pence should be allowed to do, Trump said, when you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. Again, back to this idea that there's some sort of ongoing criminal action which gives Trump supporters additional legitimate powers and authority. He said, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. I think this one really touches into the sense of urgency. So the whole country will be gone. That seems pretty severe. He wraps up by talking about how we're going to the Capitol where we can help the Democrats and the weak Republicans by giving them the kind of pride and boldness they need to take back our country. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. So when looking at all of this, it isn't that there's necessarily one statement that's extremely over the top. But when taking all the statements together, when seeing how they build on one another and how one statement kind of explains what he might have meant by another statement, can somebody be 70% sure that the speech intentionally or recklessly incited an insurrection? Does this establish the criminal state of mind, mens rea? In my opinion, yes. Trump is probably guilty of this item too, in the context of impeachment. But if this were a criminal trial, his right to free speech would probably outweigh the evidence pointing toward inciting an insurrection. He never explicitly said to do something violent. What really sways me to believe he's guilty in the impeachment context is the fact that his entire argument is based on lies. He was encouraging those people to march on the Capitol based on a disproven conspiracy theory, the whole stolen election thing. Also, the sense of urgency, as I mentioned, really bothered me. He really revved up the crowd. He wasn't saying, look, go home for a month or two and think about things and write me a letter. He was saying, do something right now. What abilities and equipment did they have right in that moment? I mean, again, he wasn't looking for some type of campaign they could initiate from home. He was looking for something they could do in that moment. So that kind of limits the options. It is not unreasonable to believe that he wanted them to do something on the violent side. This was really all about not accepting defeat. Trump could not stand to lose. His narcissism led to death and destruction. I believe he both foresaw the outcome and desired the outcome. There was mens rea. It was intentional. He had a guilty mind. If somebody wanted to argue that he foresaw the outcome but did not desire the outcome, that would still be reckless, which would be bad enough to be found guilty in this context. So what will really happen in this case? I'm not sure. If the Senate votes in a way consistent with how the House voted, a few Republicans coming over to convict with the Democrats, that would probably not be enough. I think the vote will probably be based on party affiliation and not be based on logic. When we think of the House of Representatives and the Senate, common sense isn't the first thing that comes to mind. I thought it was interesting watching the impeachment process unfold in the House. All those representatives pontificating, each trying to get their soundbite memorialized. I always find it funny when lawmakers talk about other people being narcissistic. If narcissism was hydrogen, there would be enough in the House of Representatives to inflate the Hindenburg. The last question I'll answer here, how should the senators vote? From a political perspective, so from the perspective of each party. I mentioned this before. Obviously, Democrats are not fans of Trump, so it would make sense that they would vote to convict. And I think Republicans are better off without him in the party. So both parties win by convicting him. But I would be surprised if that happens. I think this will all end up going away. He already has the second impeachment on his record, so to speak, and I think that's probably all that's going to happen. So those are my thoughts on these questions about the impeachment process and mens rea. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.